RediscovHer. I'm Mary Beth Rosebrough. Last time we talked about listening to our inner voice because I wanted to get us started with an upbeat idea and give us back some of that confidence and direction that maybe we've lost. So that was an episode to get us started on a positive note. Today, I hope that it's still a positive experience for you because it'll be something that you can relate to. I'm going to share with some of the experiences I've had in my life that caused me to have to rediscover. So, I think it's in Peter Pan, there's that term, the lost boys. Well, today maybe we could think about this as the lost girls. I want to talk about, so that maybe you can relate to some of my experiences, what happened to me. And then in the next podcast, I'll tell you what I did to start fixing that, how I'm rediscovering myself, the techniques that I'm using. So to start with, I want to give you a little of my background. I have 5 children, and the first 4 were born in 5 years. So it was more like a herd of children. And then 13 years later, I had another baby. I probably mentioned this in my introduction, but I don't expect you to remember that because I certainly wouldn't. Anyway, it was a very busy household, and I got married when I was pretty young. I think I was 24. Maybe I had been a little sheltered in my life, but when I married my husband, who already had an 8-year-old son, I was extremely unprepared for what that was going to entail. And even though I was the oldest of 6 and had done a lot of babysitting, I also was unprepared for what parenthood entailed. So I had my first baby at 26. My oldest, a daughter, was born. And then by the time I was 31, I had 4 children. So what happened was that, there were a lot of activities very concentrated and very similar. So there was a lot of running around. And what happened was I had to be immersed in their lives because of all the lessons and art shows for my oldest daughter, and baseball games for my son, and speech and debate tournaments for my other daughter, and my youngest daughter in her performances, her violin performances, and right now I can't even think of all the things that they were involved in, but it was a lot. They had piano lessons, and they had art lessons, and they had dancing lessons, and they played t-ball and softball and baseball. And my other oldest daughter was a swimmer in high school. And my youngest daughter played violin. And my children all went to an art school magnet that they had to audition for high school, my 4 oldest ones. And so there were a lot of performances, activities, tournaments, showings that we had to go to. It was pretty nonstop. And involved in that mix, except for my oldest, who was 18 when the youngest was born and who's going to college. Not only was I involved in all their activities, but I had to take a baby along with me. So it was quite the busy life. And I had a job always at my church, an unpaid, a volunteer job. My church is basically a volunteer staffed church. Even our bishop does not get paid and has a family and a full-time job on top of being the bishop or in other churches is called maybe the pastor or the priest. So it was a lot of activity all growing up. And the way I first realized that I was kind of losing who I was, let me just go back a little bit. When we first got married and had our first daughter, had our first 2 children, well, had our first 4 children, actually. It lasted for the first 4. We didn't have a lot of money. And so because of that, I had to be really creative when I was decorating the house. And our first little house that we had, I did, I think, a pretty good job of that. I was happy with it anyway. And I used my creativity and used the materials around me to make some decorations for my house so that it looked welcoming and cozy. Okay. So then as time went on, our family grew, obviously, and I became really busy and didn't have so much time for creative pursuits. I did some things, but oftentimes when I did that, if I focused on them really solidly, then sort of the house would fall apart, things would happen, and I just couldn't live like that. Like, that just wasn't my style. So I have to keep my house organized, or I had to keep my house organized in order to be able to deal with all the outside activities that were going on. I didn't have time to spend a half an hour looking for scissors or for a presentation board if they needed it for school. So I kept my house really organized, and I tried to keep up with everything. We didn't have dirty dishes in the sink, and the dishwasher didn't stay unloaded for days on end, anything like that. We tried to keep up with everything so that our life would run a little more smoothly in the midst of all this activity. And so as time went on, my husband started his own business, and he was gone a lot. When he first started, he would work his business during the day, and at night he worked on call at a hospital. So he wasn't around very much during those first few years as he was setting up his business. So eventually we started making some more money, and I moved to a bigger house. And I remember when I went to do something kind of creative in order to start to decorate that house, which was much bigger than the one we had lived in. And I would try some creative type projects because now I could afford a cleaning lady to come in and help me, and also do some nanny work for me when I went back to school. So the pressure was off a little bit. So I had a little bit more time, but I also had the money to buy things for the house if I needed them. But so when I sat down to try to do something creative, I realized that I didn't so much have that skill anymore. That because I hadn't used it, and because my life had become so wrapped up in the activities of our family and just keeping the family running and keeping things on track, that creativity had been lost. Not completely, but to a great extent. And, it came from the fact that I didn't need it as much because I had money now to buy what I needed, but also because I didn't use it. I didn't have time to use it. I had done I remember I had tried some things during those growing up years, but I couldn't stay with those for too long because then things would fall apart. And as I said before, that wasn't going to work for me. It would have been total chaos if I hadn't kept up with the house and the bills and the laundry and the cleaning and all those kinds of things, on top of constantly keeping track of 4 very busy children and then a baby later on. So that was one way a little piece of myself slowly disappeared, and something that I need to rediscover. Another thing that happened was that, and I hope that maybe some of you can relate to this, was that because of all the activities, my life became more structured around the children's lives. And it was kind of like what they were interested in, I had to become interested in. So, for instance, I grew up in a family where my dad was really into sports. He, at one time, was told that he could probably make it to the minor leagues of baseball. And who knows? He often wondered if he could have made it to the majors with practice and determination. But at any rate, he was a great baseball player and loved professional baseball and watched it. And I grew up going to baseball games and having the baseball games on the TV. But I also grew up having football games on the TV during football season. And since I grew up up north where it has 4 seasons, not like here in Florida where I live now. You can't play baseball in the winter, so there's and in the fall there's football season. So that football the games would be on all weekend long, and I guess there was Monday Night Football back then. I don't remember. I just remember hating the sound of football games. It just sounded like background noise to me constantly. I didn't understand the game. Nobody in my family played football, so I was not a fan. But of course, one of my children, the youngest, decided that he loved football and wanted to play football. So all of a sudden, I had to develop an interest in football. I mean, what kind of mother says anything against something that their child loves and wants to do? I didn't want to be that kind of mother. So I had to start liking football too and appreciating football. And so maybe you can look at that as a good thing, I suppose, but I think it's just a way to show that what they were interested in now had to become what I was interested in, but that was really not my natural self. I would have preferred to spend the time I spent around football probably doing something a little bit more creative or something a little bit more internal. So that's one of the ways that represents the idea of how sometimes our personalities or our interests have to change to go along with the interest of our family members, which isn't a bad thing, but it can lead us to kind of lose who we are and what's important to us. Another thing, of course, is just having to spend all that time doing all those other activities. Like I said, my children were involved in a lot. And so that, of course, just the time constraints led to a lack of opportunity for me. Going back to school was one of the ways, though, that I took the opportunity available, the small window of time that I could go after I had the cleaning lady / nanny who was able to watch the baby. But as I said earlier, it took me 10 years to finish 2 years of college. I only went twice a week. And so I was limited to the courses I could take because of my family responsibilities and also my responsibilities at my church. And so that was another way that I kind of lost some of who I was, because there were other courses that I would have loved to have taken, but they weren't offered on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I didn't feel like I could be away more than 2 days a week, because I was most focused on being a good mother, or as good of a mother as I could be. You might ask some of my children what they think, and they might disagree with some of that. But kids, if you're listening, I did the best I could. I really tried. I really did. Anyway, so I think just the demands of being a mother and serving your family. I mean, that's how we spend our time, right? Doing the laundry, doing the dishes, making the meals, doing the grocery shopping, taking care of the sort of the trajectory of the family, like keeping everybody on track. And then, of course, there's also being concerned with their emotional needs and spending time with them, making memories, and creating a happy home, hopefully a happy home. Again, kids, I tried the best I could. And, yeah, so it's a lot of responsibility, and it's a lot to think about, and the focus has to be outside of ourselves, because that's what life demands when you have a family. And if you're working outside the home too, I mean, that's a whole other category of things to think about and to deal with. And I really don't know how people work full-time and raise a family. I did work almost full-time when my littlest was in high school, and it was hard. And I think he suffered a little bit because of that. He loved the freedom, but I think it would have been better if I would have been there to lend a little more guidance and to be close by instead of an hour and a half away, which is what I was when I worked at the museum on the reservation. So just because life sort of gets in the way, I think we begin to lose ourselves a little bit. It's impossible to accomplish, I think, all the goals that we dreamt about when we were young, to keep some of that childlike enthusiasm as life brings its own trials and issues. And eventually, I think a lot of us, not everybody, but a lot of us can look back and kind of wonder, what happened? How did I get lost in the mix? I remember when I first became single, and my children were all gone. My youngest had moved out to his own apartment, and I had the experience of, the empty nest. And people would say to me, well, just find the things that you love and do those. And I remember thinking, well, what are the things that I love? I don't even remember anymore. I couldn't even figure it out. And that is when I really realized how much of myself I had, or how much of myself had gotten absorbed in raising a family and being married and all the things that go along with that. It was really actually a shock for me that I couldn't really remember anymore. And there had been a lot of traumatic things that happened the last 7 years or 8 years of my husband's life that were completely absorbing he got sick, and I at first remember spending every single day dealing with doctors and insurances and things like that, and doctor's appointments, and finding the right doctor and finding the care he needed, and dealing with insurance payments or denials. And when you're a caretaker like that, that is such a hard position to be in. And I think it sort of changes how you look at life. It's very wearing and very isolating. And in that time, it's also easy to lose yourself because it's pretty overwhelming. And so there were lots of factors that go into us kind of losing who we are just for ourselves, and also maybe losing some of that enthusiasm for life. But we can get it back. I am convinced of that. I know that it's been a process for me, and I'd like to hear your ideas or your stories about how you've realized that it's time to rediscover yourself. Because you know that little girl, or that young girl, or that teenage girl, or that 20-year-old girl is still inside. She hasn't gone away. She just got buried under responsibilities and concerns and worries and the problems that came along with life. But she's still in there. We can find her again. And in my next podcast, I'll talk a little bit more about how I have been rediscovering myself. I certainly don't have all the answers, and I'm certainly not a finished project. I am always a project in process, always. But to me, that's the fun of life, is excavating those things in life. Things is not a very descriptive word, but all those things in life that the world and life has to offer that I haven't found yet. And I am excited about doing that with you. I hope that you'll see me, leave your comments on Instagram. You can find me if you look in the show notes. My Instagram account will be listed. It's just Mary Beth Rosebrough, but the spelling of my last name is a little tricky. So you'll have to look in the show notes to get the correct spelling so that you can find me on Instagram and leave some comments and some of your experiences, because that was, as I said in my introduction, I hope, I don't know, I don't actually remember if I said this, but the real impetus for me doing this podcast was to prevent as many people, as many women as possible from going through some of the suffering, which is a strong word, that I feel like I've gone through. If I can help someone not have to go through some of those experiences, then I'll be happy. That's the kind of thing that I most want to do, is to be able to save other people from having to experience some of the things I did, because I just didn't know enough. And if I can help women anywhere feel less isolated, less alone, then that's my goal. And I hope this podcast has helped with some of that. I hope that if you've had these experiences, you know that you're not alone and that it's a common experience, but we're going to make it right. So I'll see you in my next podcast, where we'll learn a little bit more how to fix this issue, and we'll learn how to rediscover ourselves. This is Mary Beth Rosebrough with my podcast, Rediscover.